All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Today we're just looking at distance and midpoint formulas. We're gonna start off, midpoint formula is really not too terrible. Maybe if we can go. So to find the midpoint, we're just finding, so I'm gonna give you two ordered pairs, x1, y1, x2, y2, and we're really just going to, oops, I took my mask off. We're gonna find the point in the middle. So your midpoint is just going to break up the distance. So if the distance between here is 10, we're just going to go to the middle of 5, whatever happens. So like this would be your midpoint. So to find your midpoint, if I give you two ordered pairs, you're going to take the x's, add them together, divide by 2. Take the y's, add them together, divide by 2. This is the technical, whoops, I'm going to change that to 2. Should just be 2. So x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is the technical formula. Just remember, add your x's, divide by 2, add your y's, divide by 2. So here's our first one. We're going to add our x's, divide by 2, add our y's, divide by 2. So if I add my x's, what are my two x values? So in your order pair, is the x first or second? First, so I'm going to take the 3 from this point, and then I'm going to take the 8 from that one, I'm going to add them together. Then I'm going to divide by 2. Then for the second number, I'm going to take 10 plus 4, and again, I'm going to divide by 2. Then I'm just going to simplify each one of my little fractions. So 8 plus 3 is 11 over 2. 10 plus 4 is 14 over 2. And then I'm going to double check. Can I reduce either one of these? Yeah. So the 11 over 2, I'm going to keep it as it is. But the 14 over 2, 14 divided by 2 is just 7. You could convert this to a decimal, 5.5, 7, if you wanted to do that as well. So either one of these answers works. Again, I told some of you yesterday, I think I told you, sometimes I have people who type things in their calculator to get the decimals and somehow they hit the wrong button and they get the wrong answer. So if you're worried about that, just go ahead and just leave it as an improper fraction and that'll be fine. See if you can set this one up. So see if you can get your x's on the top of the first fraction, divide by 2. Y's on the top of the second fraction, divide by 2. So this one, when I simplify, I get negative 2 divided by 2, which I have to reduce to negative 1. Negative 4 divided by 2, which reduces to negative 2. So this answer will just be negative 1 comma negative 2. So the middle between those points will be negative 1, negative 2. Questions about this one? One more. See if you can figure this one out. Oops. Everybody get negative 1,2. Alexis, yes. You awake? No. Questions or concerns on finding midpoints when you're given two ordered pairs? Can we do this? Okay. The next one, I'm going to tell you that P is the midpoint of line segment XY. Remember we talked about line segments yesterday. Has a beginning and an end. But if P is the midpoint, I'm going to draw myself a line segment. So here's my line segment. My line segment's XY, so one of my endpoints needs to be X, one of them needs to be Y. If P is the midpoint, I'm going to go to the middle of that line segment and I'm going to put P. So that's my diagram to depict our situation. P is the midpoint, which means it's in the middle of line segment XY, which means X and Y are hanging out at the ends. Then they tell you that the distance from X to P is 8X minus 2. So I'm going to go to XP and label it 8X minus 2. Then they tell you that PY, the distance from P to Y, is 12X minus 30. Find the value of X. How do you think we're going to do this? What do you know? If P is my midpoint, what do you know about this distance and this distance? What do they have to be? Something's in the middle. Yeah, it's going to create two equal segments. If this is the midpoint, then this distance has to be exactly the same as this distance. So these two things they just gave you have to be equal to each other. So we're just giving you a fancy way of making your own equation. So we're going to take the 8X minus 2, set it equal to 12X minus 30, and we just have an algebra problem to solve. So if you're going to solve for X, lots of different ways you can do it. I would start off by subtracting 8X from both sides. So -2 equals 4X minus 30. I would add 30 to both sides. I'm going to run out of room. Divide by 4, and X equals. So this tells us that X has to equal 7. You could go back in and plug X in here to figure out the distance from X to P, which of course would be the same as P to Y. Sometimes they'll ask you, instead of find the value of X, they'll be like, find the value or the length from X to Y. You would have to find this, plug it back in, and then just double it to get both of them, or you can plug it back into both to get your answer. Does that make sense? So there is a question like this on your first test, if I remember correctly. Oh, here it is, the question I just told you about. So here I'm giving you G is the midpoint of line segment FH. See if you can draw yourself a diagram where G is the midpoint of a line segment with F and H at the ends. If you want a calculator, there are calculators up here on my desk. They've all been cleaned since first and second period. So they're all sanitized. So this one sets up really similarly to the last one. I'm giving you the length of FG and GH. Both of those are equal to each other. So we're going to set 14x plus 25 equal to 73 minus 2x. And then we're just going to solve for x. So I would add 2x to both sides to cancel this out. Add 2x over here. So 16x plus 25 equals 73. Subtract 25. So 16x equals 48. Beside it, divide it. We're going to divide by 16 to get x equals 3. Now this time the question didn't ask us to find x. The question asked us to find the length or the distance from F all the way to H. So there's at least 3 ways we can do it. So you know that this piece plus this piece equals the entire length. You also know that this piece has to equal this piece, and this piece has to equal that piece because they're midpoints. So you can plug in 3 here, figure out the value from F to G and just double it. You can plug in 3 here, find that value and double it, or you can take both of these, add them together, and then plug in 3. Anybody have a preference? Did I confuse you, Jackie? You good? Did I confuse you? No? Are you sure? It's hard to judge people because I can't see your face. What do you want to do? Anybody care? No? Okay. Let's just plug it into the first one. So 14 times 3 plus 25. So when we plug it in, 14 times 3 is 42, plus 25 is 67. Well, that tells me that the length from F to G is 67. Since I know that G is the midpoint of this line segment, I also know that this side has to be how long? 67. So if I'm asking you to find the entire distance, what are you going to do with the 67? Add them together. So 67 plus 67 tells you that the length from F to not G, to h equals 67 times 2 is 134. So line segment FH has to equal 134. All right. So the next one, I'm giving you a diagram, and I'm telling you that line N bisects the line segment QR, and then we're asked to find QP. So here, really similar to what we were just given, except now I'm giving you a diagram, labeling it for you. So we have this line segment here. It's being cut by this line N, but we know that point P bisects. Bisects means we're cutting this line segment into equal pieces. So just like the one we just did, this is going to equal this. So we're going to set 3x plus 5 equal to 5x minus 19. See if you can figure out what x equals first. So set those two segments equal to each other. Because our keyword there's bisect. If I'm bisecting something, I'm cutting it into two equal pieces. Oops. So when we do that, we get a value for x of 12. Did the question ask me to find x? No, the question said find QP. That means find the distance from Q to P, which is this distance represented right here. How do you think I'm going to find that distance? So I'm going to take 12 and I'm going to plug it in right here where this x is. So I'm going to take 3 times 12 plus 5, and that's going to tell me what QP is. So when I simplify that, 3 times 12 is 36, plus 5 gives you 41. So the distance from Q to P is 41. Questions on midpoints? It's really all we do with midpoints. The next thing you might have seen before is a distance formula. So again, I've kind of written it two different ways. To find the distance between 2 points, you're going to subtract the x and square it, and then subtract the y, square it, and add those two numbers together. And then we have this big long square root over top of it. So the last thing you do is take the square root of it. This is how you'll see it written on any formula sheet that you're given: x1 minus x2 squared plus y2 minus, y1 minus y2 squared. Sometimes you'll see it, and the 2's will both be here and the 1's will both be there. It doesn't matter. Either way will work just fine. So a lot of times on these, when we use the formula, I tend to use this one because it's shorter. Maybe if I can write. A lot of times I make my students label them. This is x1, this is y1. This is x2, this is y2. And then you're just going to the formula that you have here, and you're taking, instead of writing x1, we labeled x1, 3 is x1, so I'm going to put a 3 right there in my formula. Then instead of writing x2, I'm going to go where x2 is, and I'm going to replace it with 8. So in the first set of parentheses, we're going to have 3 minus 8 underneath here. Still in parentheses squared, then we're going to add our second set of parentheses that we'll look at in just a minute. So for our second set of parentheses, we're going to y1 first. Well, y1 is 10, so I'm going to write 10 first. Minus, the minus sign just comes down from our formula. Then we're looking for y2. I labeled the 4y2, so 4 comes down. So now once we've got this, we're kind of done with that for the time being. Actually, really forever. And we're just going to simplify this. When we simplify, we want to go inside our parentheses first. So inside my parentheses, get simplified first. So I'm going to take 3 minus 8. Then I'm going to take 10 minus 4. Now I'm going to, can't do anything inside my parentheses, so I'm going to have to square both terms. So when I look here, I'm going to take negative 5 squared. If you're using a calculator, you must put this negative 5 in parentheses before you square it. Because that means negative 5 times negative 5, which is 25. Plus 6 squared, this time it's positive, so I'm going to take 6 times 6, which is 36. Oh, I did. Then I'm going to add these two numbers together. I'm going to take 25 plus 36, and that gives me 61. If you have a calculator, I would type it in my calculator to figure out that the distance, or the square root of 61, is approximately, so I'm going to change my equal signs to, these are the approximate symbols, to 7.81. So if you type the square root of 61 in your calculator, you get this big long decimal. We always just go 2 decimal places, 7.81. Questions on this one? Because they're so talkative. All right, one more. We're gonna find the distance between these 2 points. See if you can label your points and then plug them into the formula. So for this one, I labeled the top left point x1, y1, and I labeled the second point, the one on the right, x2, y2. So when I plug into my formula, I want x1 minus x2. Well, x1 is -5. x2 is 3. So I'm going to plug in -5. The minus sign comes down from the formula, and then I have a 3. That's all in parentheses, squared. Again, that squared is from the formula. For my y's, I'm taking y1 minus y2. Well, y1 is 0. y2, in this case, is -6. So right up here, I've got this double negative. This negative came from the formula. This negative came along with the 6. So anytime you have a double negative, that just means you change it to a positive. So I'm just going to make that one big plus sign. And then I'm going to simplify just like we did on the last problem. So first thing we're going to do is combine like terms underneath. In our parentheses, so -5 minus 3 is -8, still squared. Plus my second set of parentheses, 0 plus 6 is just 6. Again, still squared, we haven't done anything with it. Now we're going to take -8 and square it. -8 in parentheses squared means -8 times -8, which is 64. Plus 6 squared. 6 squared just means 6 times 6, which is 36. Now I'm going to take 64 plus 36, which adds together to give me 100. And then in my calculator, I'm going to take the square root of 100. Which this time just gives me 10. It's a whole number. So the distance between point A and point B would be 10. questions on this one? You do have an assignment on the front page, just review your questions are just. Just make sure we flip it back over and put your name on. So again, that front side is just a review if you get stuck. And on the back side, you're given 2 points. You're asked to find the distance and midpoint on both of those, and there's a challenge question at the bottom. You get stuck, let me know. Come see me. Holler at me. So.